Please record. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the DeepSEO Conference webinar series. I'm Steve Grinzer, and my partner over there is Doc Sheldon. You know both of us. Today we are presenting the SEO Clarity click-through rate study that was done by Mittal Gandhi and Mark Traphagen over at SEO Clarity. And to say the least, some of the results they found in their study were dramatic. And we'll kind of let them start off, and we'll ask them some questions along the way and see what they've learned. Mittal, go ahead and take off.
Sure. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Doc. Really glad to be here. I think for most of the audience, they may have already seen the study. If they're not, it's all over. We've published it on Twitter. You should be able to find it pretty easily on our website too. What makes this study different than any other study before is just the breadth and scale of data that we analyzed. Most of us in the SEO world have seen over the years many different CTR studies, all the way back from the AOL one that was based on about a few dozen million rows of data. And over the years, people have used different data sources, especially Search Console data and so on. This is the first study in our knowledge that looks at clickstream data and understanding click-through rates from the rawest of the raw data that is available, which is clickstream, actual people doing searches on Google. But that's not just it. That's not just the source of data. It's the breadth and depth of data. We looked at over 750 billion impressions, that's billion with a B impressions, 30 billion clicks across 17 billion unique keywords, just a number of factors greater than any of the most recent studies that have been done. And it wasn't just the size of the data. I think what's really key about this is how you get a very different perspective of what's happening in search when you are able to zoom out. Nearly all studies, including the one we did and we've been doing for a couple of years, nearly all of these studies have been very, very focused. They've been much smaller. That means that the ability for that sampling error to shift our perspective has been much greater. And this study is the first one that actually blows it away in terms of how large of a population sample we looked at. So that's just my long introduction to the study itself.
And I think the usefulness of the study also, to add one thing, is that not only did we look at far more data and far more actual data, again, from actual users doing real searches, but also segmented in, I think, far more useful ways than others had in the past. So most of the click-through rate estimates that you get or studies that you get in the past are kind of generalized very broadly. We've dug down into a lot of different segments that we can get into over the course of the show here that showed some interesting differences between, depending on the vertical that you're in, where you are geographically, mobile versus desktop, all kinds of things like that.
Well, it is. It's a massive effort, and I was first blown away by the numbers. 750 billion impressions. So the first question that comes to mind from my standpoint was, how in the world did you harvest that?
So this data has been aggregated over the last 2 years. So we have data going back to roughly the start of 2019, and the beauty of our Clarity Grid infrastructure is that it can aggregate all of this data as it comes in and collect it, pivot it, be able to analyze it, query it, all of that. And it was a massive effort. This was 3+ months in the making with our data science team to crunch all this data. And it was a good way to flex our data science muscle too.
And SEO Clarity is an enterprise platform. Almost all of our clients are enterprise level clients, some of the biggest brands in the world. So we have to have that kind of capacity, that kind of ability to crunch that level of data on a massive scale.
So more than just a Google data sheet.
No, though I love my Google data sheets too.
So 17 billion keywords over 2 years is a staggering number. I mean, that's hard to wrap your brain around. And I saw in the study you were able to break this down into different categories, different niches, verticals, however you want to talk about those. was there one niche or vertical that stood out to you as just never would have expected that?
I would say there were a lot of interesting insights for a lot of the niches that we look at. We are particularly fond of e-commerce and travel because that's where a lot of our clients are. And at a high level, what is stunning for us was just the precipitous drop in CTRs across the board. No matter even if we looked at the last study that we did, or even the recent studies that others have done with with different data sources, the click-through rates declines were across the board on desktop and mobile, and in nearly every industry. So it was, if we looked at apparel, fashion, e-commerce, travel, we've known for years that travel has seen rapidly declining click-through rates because of Google Flights and Google Hotels and all of these very specific monetization efforts by Google to enter that market. But it was really interesting to see that it's not just travel that is suffering. Real estate has a very similar problem, where Google Local is eating a lot of the real estate lunch in some cases, right? But also other e-commerce categories like beauty and fashion, and even finance and business and industrial. All of them are, there's little tidbits in every one of them, depending on which industry you're focused on.
Right. So looking at this, just to give some perspective for some people who haven't read the study yet, I seem to recall most of the number one spot click-through rates were sub 10%.
That is exactly right. I think the highest we found was in industry, if I'm recalling correctly, in one particular industry, it may have gone up to 9.5%, and I think it was finance, and which would make sense because for most finance keywords, unless it's a stock quote or if it's a company information where Google can present a quick answer, most of them still are very pure results, and with just less pay-per-click and less other search features than most other e-commerce related industries.
And then overall, something that many people have been commenting on this study is just when you look at the, our aggregate numbers across everything, the average of everything, how low, much lower than previous estimates the CTR is. So, for desktop, it's like a little over 8% for position 1, and for mobile, a little under 7%. We've had people tell us that they've been using models or tools that they use models that are still based on up to 40% on position 1, and it's obvious to us now that that's way out of whack.
Yeah, I think that was the thing that struck both of us the most surprising was that number one slot having such a low CTR almost universally.
Yeah.
Well, geo or device or niche notwithstanding. If you got anywhere close to 10%, you were at the top of the heap.
Yeah,
that blew me away.
And there's a really interesting thing to understand about the data. Most studies, because they're based on Search Console data and they're based on clients' Search Console data, which includes our own CTR study that we did prior to this one. Prior to this one, when we looked at CTR, we were always looking at large enterprise clients' GSE data and trying to extrapolate from there. What that meant was there was a natural bias because these are large enterprise brands. They have large brand percentage of traffic. 30, 40, 50% of their traffic could be brand related, which is hugely skewed from the reality of the internet. On the web, these brand searches, if you look at overall searches of everything that happened, are a minuscule part of the total number of searches that happen.
Right.
That's why this was so interesting and to your point, Doc, when you see the click-through rates decline, it's more so that we think it's more accurate view of what the click-through rates really are when you look at everything in aggregate. But the key here is, and this is important for the audience to take away, is there is nothing that replaces calculating your own click-through rate curve. So we're presenting this whole research study as a way for companies and for individuals and for SEOs to use as a benchmark to see in aggregate, in aggregate, what the click-through rates in each rank position are globally. But then it is super important to run the click-through rate curves based on your own data, based non-brand data, especially your non-brand keyword data, and compare it to these benchmarks to really tell if you're doing better than the benchmark or worse.
And I'll just throw in
Yeah.
just something
Go,
that
Chris.
we offered to people for free is if you search SEO Clarity CTR Study on Google, you'll find our landing page. And on the landing page is a link where any business can go in and ask us to calculate their individual CTR for them.
Nice.
That's absolutely free.
That's very nice. Because that's one of the first concerns that comes to my mind is, okay, if I'm using some third-party tool that's been consistently telling me I'm hitting 23, 26, 27% CTR, and then I see your study, my inclination may be to say, hey, I'm sitting on top of the world. I'm doing great. Let's not take that for granted, because these numbers are not at all, I don't think, what anybody is expecting to see.
Yeah, 100% agreed. And I think one of the other data analysis pitfalls or mistakes that some people make is to look at CTR in aggregate, even for their own data. It is really important to separate out your brand versus non-brand keyword intent. And if you can go even further than that, if you have multiple product lines or multiple categories, services that you offer, to look at your click-through rate curves by that category or product or service. Because the human behavior is different. The search features that Google shows are different based on the type of things that you look for. Just in the previously we were talking about real estate versus finance, and finance having really good high click rates comparatively among industries, but fashion and apparel not having that good. That's because there is an underlying difference in the search features and the paid search competition and so on between these sets of keywords. So really important. If you're a large company and multi-product retailer, look at it as segmented as you can.
So we've been. I have a few clients in some, like especially in the real estate industry, at various sizes and levels, from one that's mostly the East Coast, up and down the East Coast, versus some of the small local guys, and almost all of them have abandoned Google entirely. They don't even bother with it anymore, because their customers don't come from Google. They come from Zillow. They come from Realtor.com. They come from the massive industry sites. And I'm wondering if part of that overall drop in click-through rate that we're seeing is a combination of those issues where people looking for homes aren't necessarily, they're going to Google to go to Zillow versus individual company websites, especially when you look at the wasteland that the first page is on Google. If you're going to, you're searching for a home, you're not going to get a local realtor. 9 times out of 10, you're going to get one of these big data houses. You're not going to get somebody who can actually help you buy or sell a house. And it sort of feels like in a lot of industries that Google has gone so far one direction that they've ruined what they were originally supposed to be, a place for people to come and find things.
Yeah, it's an interesting observation. I'll cover it in 2 parts because I think this is important for everyone. We see this a lot in many different industries. Since we sit on top of so much data, we look at the industry slightly differently. And what you're describing as happening in the real estate is actually very similar to what's happened in travel before, right? Lot of the smaller travel companies have found it harder and harder to compete with as the larger companies have gotten smarter and better at addressing the needs and challenges and questions that people ask. At the same time, we're also seeing industries, and I'll take a very obtuse example, lumber. Right, you would think that the Home Depots of the world and the Lowe's of the world and these large, aggregators of a lot of the stuff would just dominate the lumber and local carpet and those kind of home services. And yet, in those industries, that doesn't seem to have happened yet.
Yeah.
And it's interesting for us to watch because we see that very clearly in your example of real estate and travel that are happening. But there are niches where that is still not quite to the same extent, and local competitors have figured out a way to compete very effectively against larger, more well-heeled competitors. On the click-through rate side of things, since our data looked at clickstream data, it included clicks for anybody that showed up in the top results. and at a localized level, because clickstream is inherently local to a specific location. All search is local to a specific location, right? It's just we aggregate it up. So in that case, I would say it would be interesting to see how many local players we were able to find that people click through on versus one of the larger companies, because we do see where the search happened and where did they click through to. So that may be an interesting follow-up as to do is how much of that clicks are going to local competitors versus just Google local, which we can see all the time, and large aggregators.
That would be interesting to know because,
Yeah, it would be.
you know, it's so hard for a lot of the smaller local companies to compete
Yeah.
because they don't have the IT departments, they don't have the SEO departments, they don't have big budgets,
Right.
and they have to rely on being local as their savior. For me, a prime example is the nearest Lowe's to me is 44 miles away.
Mhm.
You know, well, the nearest McDonald's is 22 miles away. So, I mean, I'm an exception in that we are so rural where we are, and Google simply doesn't know how to handle us.
Mhm.
Because when I do a search, even if I specify a city, the nearest big town is Jackson, but it tells us Jackson, Mississippi, not Tennessee. I say Lexington, it gives me Kentucky, not Tennessee. I say Savannah, it gives me Georgia, not Tennessee. And so, you know, for me, even though we're a small segment of the population, local search is almost useless.
Hmm.
We have to be so specific on what we're doing. It's almost easier just to drive there and go look.
Okay. Yeah, that's being in Chicago, it's hard for us to see because it's so honed in. To your point, I never thought that the algorithms are so honed into what is the most number of people searching for, right? The intent is driven by the majority of people searching for, so which is how Google Suggest works, which is how most of everything works, right? Statistics and numbers determining what surfaces to the top. So Savannah, as soon as you said it, my first inclination was also Georgia, right?
And I live like in the middle of all three of these cities. Whichever direction I go through one of those to get anywhere. And I specifically either have to type in a zip code or Tennessee. Otherwise, it simply gets it wrong. Even though I'm on a local DSL searching from home and they know my home address.
Yep, and they know your IP. They know they can pinpoint you, right?
And I don't know how that applies to some of this, but I like the idea of trying to break the data down a little more versus specifically local versus more big box city type stuff, because that would be an interesting piece of information to have as well. I know we all have some SEO clients that are at the very small end, and it's so challenging. But now with Google, what do they call it now? Business places or whatever.
Business profile.
Business profile. They changed the name again. I would also be curious to how much of that is pulling click-through away from the main search results.
We lump all of those right now into the Google listings. When we think about the local 3-pack and link and clicks going to the local 3-pack, we think about Google local listings. And they may or may not be business profiles that somebody has owned, but it's powered by Google Maps, right? So it's anything that Google Maps knows from any of its data aggregation that location exists. And I can tell you that is a huge part of where the clicks go to for those industries. When Google has honed in and determined that something has a super hyper local intent, that is the first thing they see. That is the biggest thing searchers see, and that is where the clicks also naturally gravitate to. So Google seems to have figured out this machine where it's working well for them. Where if the clicks lead the way, and somebody sitting back in Google's headquarters is looking at these numbers and saying, "Yep, when we put Google local there, a majority of people click through, so that's a good thing, right? Most of the people find it useful, and that's probably what's driving that." To the detriment of everybody who has a website who's trying also to win that same click.
Right. It reminds me of Terry Van Horn saying Google needs more money, so they turn the dial. and they can do that because they own it. So, I mean, I read through the study over the weekend, and we saw the absolutely abysmal click-through rates. I mean, we're looking at all of page one only accounting for 22 to 25%.
Yeah.
Click-through. I mean, that's the whole page one.
Yeah, now there is a lot more on Google's pages than the first AOL study came out, right? The 10 blue links was the AOL study, right? With the AOL clicks. But with everything that's going on, I think the large, broad data perspective also tells us that there are searches that go a lot of places. So clicks that go to Google Local, clicks that go to Google Images, people who do a search and then do a search again. Those are all outside of the 22% that actually people click through. Now, 22 to 25% is what we estimated are actually the clicks across all of page one on organic. By industry, by keyword, by a variety of different factors, it does differ, right? Averages should be taken as just that. It's averages. They can't. There's always something higher. There's always something lower. But in aggregate, we do find it interesting that about 22 to 25% of these clicks happen on page one, and people are searching, and people have been trained to search. So as we look at the evolution of the SERPs, more and more people are used to searching deeper and deeper, compared to many years ago or a few years ago when you would find a lot more people searching for broad things and trying to just get it right, or typing very, very specific things because they didn't trust Google would understand whatever they typed in broad. So I think it's all culminates into a whole broad range of things, which tells us that's not as much of a big worry unless we start seeing that drop even more, right? It's not as much of a big worry for me, since this is the first time that we're getting a snapshot of what it looks like with such a large data set. So it would even be wrong to try and compare it with any previous studies, because we could be comparing apples to oranges, right? Just the underlying data set is so different.
Right.
So we'll be repeating this study in about a few months, 6 months, and take a look at it again and see if that stays at that level, which could mean that's just how human behavior is on page one,
right,
or if it's actually declined, which could indicate more of this is getting sucked somewhere else.
Addressing that little comment about people going deeper now, we actually saw physical evidence of that in this study. One of the very surprising little results was that we went down to the not just on page 1, the top 10 results, but we went all the way down to 20. And we saw that in aggregate, when you get down into the bottom of what we traditionally would call page 2, 17, 18, 19, 20, there's a little rise that comes back up again. Not huge, but a little rise. And it actually comes up slightly higher than the bottom positions of page 1. Nobody was expecting to see that. And that's pretty amazing, that there's people that have results at the bottom of the second page, traditional second page, that are getting as good CTR as people that are like 8, 9, or 10 on page 1. And that's just evidence again that people are maybe trusting the results, even though they're not clicking on the first results. They're clicking that they're trusting more that Google has something there. Also, the mobile effect, where people are going to, we call it the thumb roll. Where naturally on a small device you kind of flip through faster. Right. So we're actually seeing some evidence of that.
Very cool.
Yeah, that was surprising.
So, I mean, you've got the 2 years worth of data with all of this. Did you do any tracking with that over the course of the 2 years to kind of get an idea if it was just a continual steady drop or if there was just a...
Yeah, we did. We looked at seasonality as part of this. And I think this is another good thing to look at and think about. And we found that CTR click-through rates are not the same across the course of the year. So we took a year's worth of data and we took daily click-through rates for every day in that period of time. And we actually published this as part of the study to show that click-through rates actually change as people's behavior through the seasons change and through events and occasions and holidays and so on. What was most surprising in the seasonality CTR was how May and December actually had the lowest click-through rates of any other time of the year. And that was super surprising for us too. We would have expected in December for it to be higher, but again, past data influencing our assumptions on this, past analysis and so on. given the clickstream nature of this data and the wide range of this nature, what we found was during December, at least we can explain December, which is a lot more searches happen. Just the volume of searches just goes up dramatically, and there's a lot more shopping and browsing activity that goes along with it that is not accompanied with a click. So imagine somebody looking to buy a particular, TV, and it's a $399 TV, and they want to find it for $349, the Black Friday deal, right? They are just hunting and not clicking because a lot of that data is now visible on the page. The prices of these products, because of schema, is right on the page. Whether or not it's in stock is right on page. So some of those things may also be influencing people not clicking till they're absolutely sure that's where they want to go. So it was super fascinating for us. We're still trying to puzzle out the May factor. I haven't quite figured out, is it summer vacation, people looking for more informational queries, home projects, fix the house,
Right.
keep kids busy with, activities, like, not entirely sure.
Well, just in the two niches I'm most familiar with, which would be jewelry and real estate, May is a terrible month anyway. It's just starting to get nice out. People are spending more time outside. May is a horrible time to be looking for a house because end of school year, you don't want to be moving while the kids are getting out of school. Same thing with jewelry. Once you get into May, all the weddings have already happened, and you start to taper down throughout the summer. So the jewelry industry starts to taper down in that time period. The rest of it, I have no idea because I'm not embedded in those markets very well.
Yeah.
But the May doesn't really surprise me too much. December surprises me a lot, but that's, maybe it's a side effect of people just going to Amazon for shopping.
Or we do see the bigger impressions, and I think that goes back to Middle's point of people are window shopping on Google now because you can.
Right.
And I think you can't emphasize enough with schema and the additional data that shows in a search result now, even in our traditional organic results, you can window shop in Google and not click through. Like I can decide later, I remember Macy's had the lowest price on this, so later on I'll go there, and check it out. But all I went to Google for was to browse. I got the information I needed, didn't need to click.
Well, go along with Eric Schmidt's old statement that we want to become an answer engine. They're getting closer and closer to that. And I know that, personally, when I'm looking for prices on something or perhaps reviews for something, a lot of times I'll find them in the search. I don't need to click anything.
Yep.
Right.
And that's becoming more and more prevalent. So that's going to drive your CTR down too.
Yep.
Outstanding. I know we're getting close to the 30-minute mark. Is there anything else out of the study you guys wanted to share real quick, or something else you may have spotted?
I think the one thing that we didn't touch on yet, but could be interesting for global clients or companies, is how CTRs differ by country. And especially how low CTRs are in the US compared to the rest of the world. In fact, we looked at 5 different countries, US, UK, Canada, Japan, and India. And US had by far the lowest click-through rate, of any one of those countries. And that could be attributed to a lot of the aggressive pay-per-click advertisers here in the US, a lot more SERP features and so on prominent in the English language. But as we look at other languages like Japan, if you look at India, where there's a booming e-commerce market, but yet India and Japan click rates are actually higher. The top 2 click rate curves across all the countries we looked at, where almost 16% click rate in position 1 still happen in India and Japan. But all the other countries, UK, Canada, and the US, are between the 9 to 12% range. So that was super fascinating, and also goes back to the highlight. Companies need to be looking at their own CTR curves, use this as a benchmark, but look at it as many segmented ways as possible. Brand, non-brand, by product, by country, if they're a global company. There may be different opportunities in each one. Yep, that's the chart.
And by device.
Yep, by device, yeah. Every which way that you can pivot it, you want to take a look at it. Especially right now, companies and SEOs are doing their forecasting for next year. right? Most companies in SEOs are doing the forecasting of where to invest for next year's growth that they are responsible for driving. Knowing your own CTR right now is a fantastic place to start. If you can't use this or contact us and we'll help you out for free to calculate your own CTR, but this is the best one for you to use for your own forecasting, right? Don't use 40% if that's not your own CTR, just because somebody else says it's 40%.
And I think that's going to have a wild effect on the predictions for next year. We're starting to see more of that in the groups and the forums. How do I do an SEO projection? And everybody, the general answer is it depends. Well, that's always the answer for everything. But having something like this to at least point to a client and say, overall, our individual results may be a little bit varied, but overall in this niche, this is what they're seeing after billions of clicks.
Exactly right. This would be conservative. It would be conservative to middle of the aggressive path versus something that is based on a lot smaller data set and it's going to be super aggressive, right? With any kind of forecast, you're better off being a little bit more conservative than saying, we're going to double next year and then figuring out it was really going to be a 10% increase.
And I wouldn't be a good...
Go ahead, Mark.
I wouldn't be a good VP of product marketing if I didn't mention that this data from this study is not only available publicly, but it's being integrated into our platform. So the SEO Clarity clients will have that advantage of being able to get that more accurate forecasting, more accurate everything that's dependent on CTR across our platform fixed into their individual niches.
Fantastic.
Well, I think that's probably the most important that you made on this study, Mitchell, is the fact that this is a snapshot in generalities, which you've done an excellent job of breaking down much more than any other study has done in the past, but it still doesn't replace your CTR, for your site, because it can vary dramatically by geo, by device, by seasonality, by country, whatever. And I think that we tend, in our industry, we tend to fall into the trap of following intuition, because this is what I'm always seeing, or so-and-so who I respect tremendously, it says he's seeing 28%, so that's probably a good thumbnail. We admit that it may vary a little bit, but I don't think it, I certainly did not expect to see the kinds of numbers that this study is indicating. And 750 billion impressions, I'm sorry, you can't throw rocks at that. That's a good data set, okay?
And it's a pretty solid data set.
And thinking about it, looking back at some of the pay-per-click stuff that we do, the click-through rate's making more sense with what we're seeing with impression share and click-through rate in PPC accounts, where your impression share is holding solid, everything's holding solid, but the actual clicks just continue to drop and get more expensive at the same time, which
which kind of blows your mind, doesn't it?
That dial that they can turn. So, well, this has been fantastic. It's been a wonderful talk, and I appreciate it. I want to give you guys a minute or two if you want to pitch something for the company or pitch your next project. Let us know what you've got going on so that we can let everybody else know what you've got going on.
That's all, Mark.
Oh, so many things going on, and so many of them I wish I could tell you about, but they're kind of under the boiling pot lid right now. We're very excited about some things that are coming out soon. But as Mitchell said, we're going to continue to run this study. It's not over and done. We're going to continue. We've gotten some great suggestions from users on or readers of the study on things that we should dig deeper into. We're going to be doing that. But we do have some great free tools that take advantage of the kind of data that SEO Clarity can have. You can find those on our site under the resources. We've got a browser plugin called Spark that gets you access to all of our data for any site on the web. To obviously a somewhat limited set of that data, but still useful enough to anybody. I'll mention our schema.dev site, which is, again, totally free tools open to anybody. Probably one of the best tools for implementing schema on a site out there. It's schema.dev. So there's a couple of things that we offer out there. And if anybody has any, again, to find the study, easiest way, this is one place where Google does work. Just Google SEO Clarity CTR Study. You'll find it. And Biddle and I are on Twitter. You can contact us there. Bill's M. Gandhi on Twitter. I'm my name. And we'd love to chat with anybody about this.
Outstanding. Thank you again, both of you, for taking the time out of your day. And
Yeah.
look forward to seeing the continued updates of this study.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And a tip of the hat, because it is an impressive study, and I can appreciate the fact that this did not come together over the weekend. This took some very concentrated effort, not just in harvesting the data, but I'm sure that I hope that your engineers are getting your appreciation, because that's a fine piece of work.
Thank you. Yes, this was a labor of love, but yes.
All right. Thank you.